meeting. We now come to item number 10, approval of the terms of reference for the Cultural Heritage Review Stage 2. If I could ask Edward Siddell to come to the table, and you're on your lonesome, Ed? You are indeed.
I am, unless
I will move the resolution. The resolution seconded by Councillor Holtz, and if I can ask you, Ed, to speak to the resolution.
Morena tātou. With your indulgence, I might just actually run through a short presentation because we haven't had a chance to workshop this since October. So I think it probably is worth just reminding you of what we are doing here. Let me just make sure I know what I'm doing with the... What's that? Is it on? Maybe not. Here we go. All right. First of all, where we're at in this process is we're approaching what we're calling stage 2. So stage 1 was the consultants report that we considered back in October, which we might also call the Stafford Report. But to go one step before that, why are we doing a review? Fundamentally, the reasons that we initiated this are that from our perspective as council staff, the sector has quite complex arrangements. Now, there were good historical reasons for those, and largely those arrangements are around the different acts of or bits of legislation that MOTAT and Auckland Museum operate under, and also the ERAFA system that we've got. Of course, what happened at amalgamation was that the landscape completely changed. We had the introduction of our CCOs such as RFA, which has the art gallery and now the Maritime Museum underneath it. Following amalgamation, of course, we had the development of the Auckland Plan and the various commitments in that plan. Following that, in 2015, Toi Whetiki was developed, the Auckland Arts and Culture Strategic Action Plan. And of course, another key context in this area is the treaty settlement in 2012, which saw the introduction of a co-governance body for the Auckland volcanoes, or Maunga. Another reason for the review is it's not really clear sometimes, I think, to the institutions what council's expecting from them from a strategic point of view. We spend around $60 million a year on our cultural heritage institutions, but we don't really have a strategy for what we're trying to do. So when an organisation such as MOTAT came to the council looking for money through the LTP, it kind of had to guess what we're looking for. And it didn't really allow us as a council to, or as staff, to give you good advice about an investment decision like that. And similarly, it's also not that clear to council through those systems what's actually being delivered through our cultural institutions, because the levy arrangements don't really allow a good two-way engagement between us as a council and those institutions. What am I doing wrong, Sandra? Here we go. All right, so just quickly, where have we come from here? We've had a number of reports and other things that have happened in terms of the context. RFA and the Auckland War Memorial Museum commissioned a report back in 2015. That's called Investing in Auckland's Cultural Infrastructure. That was written by a consultant called Tim Walker. That report was appended to one of the early reports that I wrote back in 2017. But we can make that available if councillors are interested in reading that again. As I mentioned before, Toi Whetiki was signed off by council in late 2015. In May 2017, as a governing body, you approved the terms of reference for stage 1, which led to the Stafford Report, which was received in October 2018, and we had a couple of workshops about that last year. In between that, the various institutions, not just the ones that are part of this review, but also the Navy Museum over in Devonport and one or two others like the Howick Historical Society, formed what they call the Museums of Auckland. And as a collective, they're exploring various ways of collaborating around things like staff development and, I believe, around ticketing as well. And just recently, the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum commissioned a report to give them assistance as they joined this process as well. And that report is actually appended to the report you've got in front of you this morning. Just as a reminder about what the Stafford Report said, its key conclusions were that there's a lack of clarity about what Auckland Council wants from its investment, as I referred to just before. It recommended a simplification of the governance arrangements in the sector. You know, everybody's operating under those different structures and different imperatives, and while that doesn't stop collaboration from happening, it doesn't exactly encourage it either. It recommended that the sector improve its responsiveness to mana whenua, including instituting a formal governance role for mana whenua in any new structures that we consider. This is quite an important ongoing conversation in the cultural sector. I was down in Wellington last week for the annual museums conference, and the focus was very much on how is the sector responding to Māori. It's also obviously becoming, co-governance systems are becoming more and more common in other areas, such as I said, the maunga, but also in our the way we manage our harbours. Stafford also identified that significant challenges exist, and those create opportunities to assess what we are delivering through the cultural sector and to really enhance what we're delivering for Aucklanders. Some of those opportunities are around increased accessibility for people from all parts of the city. I think it's, well, we'll find out when we confirm the evidence base, but I think it's a suspicion we've got that our cultural institutions tend to attract residents from particularly the central areas of Auckland. In terms of what we're proposing for the second stage, the same 5 institutions that were the focus of the Stafford Report we suggest should remain the focus. The one thing that has changed since then is that the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum is going to join the process. This was that they weren't consulted in a particularly deep way by the Stafford consultants, which was a choice they made because they preferred to wait until we got to the second stage and then to join the process. So that's already underway, and we've had good engagement from the forum. The second thing to note here is that all the institutions have endorsed these terms of reference and are supportive of the process that we're about to enter into in stage 2. So we had a meeting on the 9th of May at which we had attendance from board chairs and senior executives from the institutions, and they all fully endorse where we're going. The key things that we're going to look to do in the second phase is, first of all, agree the evidence base that we're working with. There is a number of aspects of the Stafford Report that the institutions in particular, and actually, to be fair, myself and Alistair and the others in our team didn't think they'd got quite right. So I think we need to make sure we're on solid ground, everyone agrees with where we're at, and then we'll move forward and we can start to talk about what our strategy for investment might be in the future. So the way we'll start to talk about that is this stage 2 is very much subsidiary to the strategies that you've already agreed. It cascades down from the Auckland Plan and Toiwhitiki. Another thing that we'll be looking to do is explore, as Stafford recommended, that enhanced role for mana whenua in line with our Auckland Plan commitments, and of course reports that have happened since amalgamation, such as the Y262 report on how government and local government responds and looks after Māori taonga. Finally, we'll be looking at clarifying what the challenges for the sector are, what the future might look like, and what are the opportunities that we've got in front of us. And only once we've done that will we start to really look at options for any formal or structural change. Just a few notes on the scope of the review. Some of you are probably wondering where this all leaves some of our smaller institutions that are around the city. The proposal that we've got, and there's a diagram both in the report and in the terms of reference document, that the smaller institutions will be involved by way of a consultation group that we'll manage. The position of this, we haven't forgotten them at all. It's about making this process a manageable one, getting the core correct, and then the position of those institutions will be considered through the process, and then especially towards the end when we start to think about what changes might be necessary. Another element is, of course, the ARAFA system, and I know this has come up in some of our previous discussions. Again, we propose that this isn't directly addressed. The focus really on this part of the review is what our strategy is, rather than going direct to let's make all these structural changes. I think the key thing is to get the strategy right, and then we can figure out what we need to change. I'd make another point about ARAFA as well, and that is that with the Maritime Museum having gone into RFA, ARAFA is now very much focused on the performing arts organisations and those organisations which I'd characterise as being around community safety. So in a sense, they have quite a different focus now from these cultural heritage institutions. The actual levels of funding that go into our institutions aren't a focus of this review either. The levy processes that we bring to you in March each year, they will continue as normal, and really I consider a separate thing to this review. In terms of the next steps we've got, obviously we've got to establish the project in the next few months. We want to have a look at some of the deliverables that were recommended by Stafford for immediate attention. One of those things is really looking at ways that Museums of Auckland Federation or collective can be reinforced and enhanced. Another thing is we may need to respond to anything that comes out of central government this afternoon around Te Papa Manukau. I was in Wellington, as I said, last week, and I did my best to get a leak out of central government on what's in the budget, and I failed. So at least in the cultural sector, they're quite tight-lipped. I'm sorry? I didn't Google it, but maybe I'll do that after the meeting and see if I can get you some information ahead of 2 o'clock.
We won't be distracted by what's happening in Wellington. Ed, if you just want to wind
yes,
up.
I'm almost finished. So where we're looking to get to is we'll work away during this year, assuming that you approve these terms of reference, and we'll look to come back in early 2020 to a new Auckland Council with some recommendations around the strategic investment priorities that we'll be looking for the sector. And then towards the end of next year, when the LTP is on the horizon, we'll be looking to come back to you with what a blueprint for the future might actually look like. Just a couple of other things to note. We're maintaining a line of communication with central government, and in particular Ministry for Culture and Heritage. I talked to them last week, and I'm always making sure I'm available if say, Minister Carmel Sepuloni, who's the designated minister for this work, needs a briefing. We may well look to see how this project aligns with the living standards framework that Treasury is promoting. I think that would be a sensible thing to do, and Ministry for Culture and Heritage is exploring at the moment what that framework means for the cultural sector. I stress also here that this process is really around a collaboration between the council and the institutions. We're not at this point looking to now spend more money on commissioning more consultants' reports. We think we've done enough of that, and we've got enough ability within council, and in particular all the expertise around our institutions to get this right. The membership of the project groups that you can see on the diagram is still being developed and will be a bit flexible, but we think that will shake down as the process moves on, but we will get that sorted. The last note is that our local board services team will be helping me make sure that local boards are involved appropriately. So finally, I'd just like to say that we've worked really hard to get these terms of reference sorted and agreed with all the institutions. I think it's a process that you can have a lot of confidence in. As I say, the institutions are all supportive. I hide from the fact that it might not be easy at times. I think there's going to be some quite difficult conversations that we need to have, but at the moment, I think for the future, everyone's working towards a really good outcome here. So I do recommend that you approve these terms of reference, but of course, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ed, and thank you on behalf of all of us for the work that you've put into that. That was a very clear explanation. So let's go straight to questions. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. So I've got some questions. Essentially, they all follow on from the Stafford Report that I'm familiar with. So in the progress of this second stage, would it be possible to have information that goes to capital cost and revenue centres for all the entities that are involved, so that at least there's an appreciation of those elements? And would it also be possible to have some analysis, some templating across the organisations around the non-financial attributes? And I'm talking about volunteerism, philanthropy. Obviously there's patronage in respect of the zoo and the like, and strong civic elements. So that would be useful, so that both ourselves and members of the public and the like that have an interest have got a much clearer understanding of what these organisations do. And that template, if it is running across all of those entities, might also have some logical application later. Is it also possible to pick up information that might be put forward in submissions that technically might not be in scope but might be relevant? For example, quite obviously, if you're taking the cultural institutions out of regional facilities, Auckland, it follows as to what do you do with the balance. Do you take, for example, stadiums that are downgraded and wind them back into parks and achieve significantly more efficiency and conceivably significant savings? So that sort of thing is technically not in scope, but it's the sort of thing that we need to have in mind. The other thing that may not be in scope, but I would suggest you might also consider, and I've got a question around it, is government is obviously a significant player across the cultural sector, and there's a strong argument across many things that we, as Auckland, are funding institutions that go to the benefit of New Zealand as a whole and government. So is it possible to have some consideration around that? And I mention that because that is a general structural problem that this council faces across all sorts of institutions and things we do.
Thank you. Ed.
So taking those questions one by one, yes, I think that as we build our evidence base through this process, we'll gather a lot of information about the different, as you put it, cost centres at in different institutions. I think we and the institutions will be happy to make that information available to the degree that they can, given that they obviously have the right to keep certain information confidential, and it's not for us to make that public. Secondly, on the non-financial question, I think again we'll be collecting a range of non-financial information, and I think it would be my hope, and definitely that of the institutions, that actually we make visible a lot more of the all the really great things that our institutions do contribute that can't be measured financially. And I think it would be a really good thing if we can make that clearer so that the public can see the kind of value that our institutions are delivering. The third question was around other things that might not necessarily be in scope, and my answer to that would be we haven't given great thought yet to what potential structural options might flow from this process down the road, but if we got into a situation where we were suggesting structural change, then obviously that would be backed by really strong advice from not just the CCO governance team, but across other parts of council and the CCOs. Yeah, you would get you'd get good advice on that. The fourth point was around a government contribution to the cultural sector in Auckland, and I think this is an issue that a lot of councils around New Zealand face, not just Auckland Council, and I'm aware that there's a remit going up at the Local Government New Zealand conference around this very topic. I think ultimately that's a political discussion for the council to have with government. You know, Ministry for Culture and Heritage, I mentioned this to them last week, and of course they've got all sorts of issues that they face around the country, such as the rebuilding of Canterbury Museum, which still hasn't been fixed since the 2011 earthquake. So I suspect that while I agree with you, it's probably, we might not even be the first, second or third cab off the rank for any kind of funding, but you know, we can but try.
Councillor Fletcher.
No, my question to Rick has been answered, although just a supplementary phrase. Have you traversed the appetite with central government? Have you traversed the appetite with central government for legislative change if it should be required once the strategy is identified?
At a staff level I have, and I think the answer is that as long as Auckland comes to Wellington with an agreed plan, that we can demonstrate delivers better value for our residents and ratepayers, then they would be happy to support it.
Thank you.
Councillor Casey.
It's more a comment rather than a question. Ed, I'm delighted to support this. I think it's been a long time coming. I especially like the idea of stage 2, and we have a better opportunity to genuinely reflect mana whenua and te ao Māori world view. And I just want to, you mentioned in passing the Maunga Authority and the UNESCO World Heritage bid, and that's a marvellous opportunity for everybody to input into that. But I also want to just comment on what happens when we don't get it right, and I want this council to look down to Ihu Mātau and what will happen in the next few weeks when Fletcher try to develop land that mana whenua do not want developed. That is an example where we should be learning from it, revisiting it and finding out what's wrong and averting the conflict that's coming. That was my comment. It doesn't need an answer.
Thank you. Councillor Holtz.
Thank you. I've just got a question and then a comment, if that's okay. So, Ed, thank you for the really good presentation. I know that the inclusion late in the piece of the local boards into our terms of reference has caused some ripples through our partners. Can we just remind people of the process by which we will resolve what the role of the local boards is, and B, just remind people of our co-governance responsibilities?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, the local boards did appear rather late on that diagram, the wiring diagram of how the process works, and it came about as a reminder from our local board services team that we did need to represent the role of local boards, even in regional strategic decision making somewhere on the diagram. I think it's important that we do have the local boards on there so that we demonstrate our seriousness about responding to the concerns and the interest of local boards, particularly in the areas where we have our institutions are based around the city, and to reflect that, especially later in the process, they will have particular concerns or interest in some of the smaller institutions that may be brought in. What I will be doing is working closely with local board services over the next month or two to explore some of the most appropriate ways to ensure local boards are involved over the next year and a half, and recognising, of course, we've got an election in October and they won't get up and running until perhaps January, February, and come up for air. So we can be we can be flexible around the timing in early 2020 and make sure that works correctly.
Mr Mayor, if I can just make a comment on that. I think it was a question raised quite rightly by our governance group, and it is a really good example of where we do need to do some work. We are in this co-governance model. We have no choice about that. However, I think we need to use this as a bit of an example of where we have meaningful discussion with our local boards, not just, whack a whole lot of reports over to them and, ignore the results. On the other hand, we need to involve them in a meaningful way when it's appropriate. And I think, as Ed has said really well, at the moment that's not necessarily clear to me as the interim chair of the group. And I think we do need to do work on that. So we'll undertake to my colleagues around the table here that work will happen, and also to our partners. And in talking about our partners, I just want to acknowledge Sue and Michael from MOTAT, who have been absolutely staunch and highly involved in the process to date. And Mr Mayor, can I just say that although to some people this might not look like the most exciting piece of work we're doing, it potentially is utterly transformative as we look at this amazing sector that we've got in Auckland that can genuinely start to reflect the potential of this city. And we've got an incredibly engaged sector. Our institutions that are involved are there, boots and all, and they're not just there for what they can get out of it, they're there for what they can contribute into it. And I just really want to acknowledge that there's a lot of goodwill in the process, thanks to the fantastic work by Ed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cooper.
I was just a little bit unclear in the report, and maybe I didn't get the chance to take up the opportunity to come and talk to you, unfortunately, because of our relentless diaries. The Stafford Report, for me, that was pretty harsh but also underwhelming. We're not going to go ahead and just implement that. That's what I want to know, because I felt that was way out left field. We're going to actually work with our organisations and our CCO rather than just implement that.
Yes, Councillor, absolutely. I mean, I think our reaction to that report was the same as yours. I think it had a number of useful contributions to make, and we'll be putting those as an input into the process, along with the other report that's attached to the report today. But yes, absolutely, we felt that it was to just implement them as they recommended would be a very top-down, quite negative approach to a sector that deserves a lot more respect and collaboration, and frankly the expertise that they've got to offer is really crucial to this process. So that was, I think it's in the report, there's a discussion that we did consider just implementing Stafford, but that's one that we rejected in favour of a collaborative process.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
In the report, it cites the Stafford Report, and in bullet point 4 is talking about encourage regional facilities Auckland to appoint board members with a stronger cultural background. What does that actually mean?
Good question, Councillor. I've realised that that's actually slightly unclear. The Stafford Report recommendation was actually for this council to appoint board members to the RFA board who have a stronger cultural background. It doesn't refer to the appointment processes that RFA advise us on for Auckland War Memorial Museum and MOTAT.
Okay, so you're equating cultural background with mana whenua descent, is that the...
No, I'm not. It's simply suggesting that there are a range of cultural skills which may include cultural competency in Māori issues, but there are a whole range of other skills that could be useful on the RFA board as well.
Yeah, okay. In this process, when will the people of Auckland, it's their culture and their cultural heritage, and made up of many different ethnic groups, a cultural city indeed, when will they have a say-so on these plans?
The plan is that obviously the governance group will have a range of representatives on it, particularly obviously the institutions who have links into the community, but we're also planning to, obviously we've got the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum representatives. We're looking to get someone with who can represent interests of Pacifica. I think the other thing to remember is we'll be bringing this back to you as councillors on a number of occasions, not just for formal reporting and approval, but also potentially for workshops. And then ultimately nothing will come of this until the long-term plan. This is all driving towards, if any changes are proposed, and they may or may not be, that this will be consulted as a significant issue through the long-term plan 2021-2031.
Look, with all due respect, you've mentioned two ethnic groups. The chair of the Auckland Museum Board is a Samoan. My question is this: when will the people of Auckland, the public, the general public, have a say-so on this? It's of vital importance to them. If you go back in history, it's the general public that built and created and funded many of these institutions, not Auckland Council. So that, I believe, is a real concern, and I would ask you to think very, very carefully about that.
Well, as I said, I think the appropriate time, once we have policy proposals that the council has endorsed, that we go out for consultation during the long-term plan. However, I'm happy to take suggestions if we get to a point in the process where the council, the governing body, feels that we need to do some extra public consultation. Perhaps we can do something along those lines.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Ed, and also thanks to Councillor Holst for a mention of the regionality and our partners in local boardland for a lot of these facilities and actions. These social groups are actually expanding their work out on a regional basis, and actually very much welcome compared to where we were before. Ed, my question is quite a simple one. It's to do with the capital programs that these various entities have underway, some big, some not so big, and how well that is going to be able to be aligned with the proposed development of the strategy.
I suspect that the capital programs that are already underway, such as up at Auckland Museum, they are well underway, and by the time that they're finished, in fact, some of the program at Auckland Museum is already completed. It's kind of too late in a sense, but I guess what I would say is that those plans probably align with where we're going to be heading anyway. I mean, in terms of when I look at Auckland Museum's plans, they are looking to open up the museum, make it more accessible. They've got, and then if I think about what MOTAT's plans are, they've in the past had big plans to improve their visitor offer. So I think the program really does create an opportunity to align those, and I suppose that's one of the key purposes of it, in a sense, is to have a clear idea of what we want from the sector so that organisations can start to align what they want to do in the future with where we're going as a council.
Certainly be some clear synergies once these capital programs get some optics that can be a benefit to all involved. So yeah. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Okay, last question, then we move to comments, although we've kind of integrated some of the presentations have involved comment as well. Councillor Walker.
Just a couple of questions. In the Stafford Report, they covered off other cities that were exemplars, for example, Copenhagen. And while they had some coverage, there wasn't a lot of detail around how things are working elsewhere, that is, models that are already up and running. Is it possible for that information to inform the process earlier rather than later? Because I would certainly be interested in that. And the other question I've got by way of a suggestion, we have a number of institutions, and I'm thinking particularly of one, which is Auckland Museum, that generally doesn't report to us directly. So we have very, very little engagement with them. Yet, if you look at their size and scope and what they're doing for Auckland, there's a phenomenal amount that they could report to us on. And I know that they would be up for that and would be interested in that. The same might apply to some of the others, particularly over the interim. Otherwise, we get into a situation where we're going to have a report back to us later, but as councillors, we've not had much exposure to what some of these entities are doing, and it's great stuff. So it's a question and a suggestion.
Ed.
Just in terms of the other models that exist around the world, yes, I think those will be a critical part of our process. There are lots of cities that do things differently from how we do them. And I think we, especially as we get towards the second part of the work, as I said, the first part's really to figure out what we want from our investment, and the second part will be starting to think about those models. That information will become really, really important. I would make the point that I made earlier as well, that in a number of other sectors, such as the way we manage our harbours, we've actually got examples here where that we can look to as well. So it's not that we have to do everything and follow slavishly a model from overseas that we think works, but yes, absolutely, I think we can provide that information and make it available to you. The second point, I agree. I think Auckland Museum has said to me at a staff level that they would welcome more opportunities to talk to council about what it does and what it delivers for the city, and I think we'll try and explore ways that we can do that so that the levy process or the levy setting process isn't such a mechanical thing, and that you have a better line of sight and better visibility of what all the great things they're delivering.
Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Eddie, I just wanted to get some clarification around the alignment with this review and toi whitiki. So, I know you've mentioned it in number 24, but I just wanted to get some clarification around it, and the comment here, sit at a lower level than toi whitiki, please.
Yes, I do see this review as very much sitting or dropping out of some of the directions that were set out in toi whitiki. I think that toi whitiki sets the broad strategic directions for the cultural sector, and there were a number of things in that strategy that referred to the importance of the institutions working together to create a network throughout the city. It talked about instituting mana whenua governance models, and it talked about getting a strategic plan for investment. So I think this is kind of the next step for one part of the cultural sector. And I will be, again, working quite closely with some of my other council colleagues who, look after toi whitiki to ensure that we've got good alignment with that strategy. But this certainly doesn't replace it, it supplements it.
Your Worship, I haven't got a question, but I've got a comment. So when
I'll get you to lead off the commentary section, which we're starting now.
Thank you, Bishop. And Eddie, as Penny and the rest have said, Councillor Holst and the rest have said, look, well done with the work here. And look, I led toi whitiki for the first 2 terms of Auckland Council, and it took us ages to end up getting all the cultural institutions, everybody on board in regards to this. And the reason I asked it is maybe it's time, as per the agenda item, it may be time to have a relook at and a refresh of toi whitiki. So, Your Worship, I think, because it's 2015 to 2025, it took us near on 5 odd years to get it developed and then launched. So, look, I think it's an opportune time. Support the recommendations in regards to this particular item around the review, but I think it may well, as a result of what Eddie is talking about around alignment, is to now look at what we can do. Obviously, in the report, it's been aligned with toi whitiki, but also been aligned with the Auckland Plan. And we know the years that we have with the Auckland Plan in regards to refresh, Councillor Darby, which is every 6 years. We haven't had any sort of refresh for toi whitiki. And I think this review has come as the right time for us to have a look at it. So I definitely support the recommendations here, Your Worship.
Thank you. Now, a number of people have already made comments, but I don't want to exclude if there's anything further to be said. I think it's pretty straightforward. Councillor Lee?
Just briefly, Mr Mayor, I have always had grave reservations about this process, which seems to have been made under the assumption that amalgamation a la Super City is the way to go and the best way to get results and efficiencies, etc., etc. And the fact of the matter is, I think we'd all concede that's not necessarily the case. I'm also concerned in this report about a clear political, I won't say ideological, but almost agenda which the report assumes should be imposed on the cultural sector from the council, and I would disagree with that. And I think that approach is really the antithesis of genuine culture and the developing multicultural culture in Auckland, which has a number of strands, and yet we only see one particular strand mentioned ad infinitum. And I would just make the point that in terms of Maori, we're talking about 11% of the population, but the emphasis is not so much on Maori, but on mana whenua, which is a much smaller percentage again. And I can tell you the argument, the dispute, the controversy about who is mana whenua has gone as far in Auckland, has gone as far as the Supreme Court and back again. And therefore, it's something that the council should be a lot more sensitive about in itself and more careful about. I would make the point again that our cultural heritage is everyone's cultural heritage, not just one group's cultural heritage. We are all Aucklanders, we are all New Zealanders, and I'd have to say the point of distinction in Auckland actually is our very large Asian population. Other areas of New Zealand, of course, have Maori as an important part of those cities and those towns, not just Auckland. Who are we kidding here? This is New Zealand. Auckland doesn't sit by itself. So if we're talking about points of difference, I think we need to think a little bit more carefully. But I wouldn't focus on points of difference in terms of ethnic composition over and over and over again. There are other points of difference which are interesting and should also be celebrated. So my concern is, I believe that the people of Auckland should have a say-so on such an important sector as the cultural institution, and there should councils which come and go should hesitate to impose currently fashionable political directions on our cultural institutions, which long predate us and hopefully will long go on after the Super City meets its end at some stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, I just want to make a couple of comments. Sorry. Councillor Walker.
Just a very quick comment. I would hope that in the options that come back to us, that we have a suite of options, including models that are collaborative rather than impositional. There may be options that are very cost-effective moving forward, and essentially following on from the comments that Councillor Lee has made, that imposing amalgamation does not always generate efficiency, effectiveness, appropriateness, or for that matter, economy, and certainly not always great engagement on the part of the community.
Thank you. Just
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, before you close the debate, can
Yes.
I just...
Councillor Holtz.
And I have made a comment. I just want to be really clear, because this is a public meeting and these comments do go out there to the public and will be reported on. If this is seen as some bizarre amalgamation agenda, this is absolute nonsense, and anyone who's read the report would actually know that that's different. This is a collaborative process with our institutions to work out the best way forward and to do it in a collaborative manner for the good of the people of Auckland. So I'm just really concerned that, to be quite honest, you know, throwing political statements out there to an opposite, putting political statements out there is unhelpful.
Sorry to interrupt, Councillor. Point of order. Councillor Newman.
I don't know what that was, but I understood that Councillor Holtz had already spoken. A number of us...
No, sorry, let me clarify that point. She made a comment under questions, as did a number of members, but she hasn't already spoken. Councillor Holtz, the floor is yours again. Okay. I want to conclude by actually reiterating what Councillor Holtz has just said. Actually, if you look at the second recommendation, you will see that all 5 of the institutions involved have been involved in a collaborative way, and they unanimously support the terms of reference and the way forward. What we knew when we began this process is that there have been difficulties in the sector for a very long time. We value the sector really highly. We put $60 million into it in financial terms, but actually in cultural and social terms, it's even more valuable. This is how we express ourselves to fellow Aucklanders, to New Zealanders, and the world. And what we know is that we need to have a joined-up process where we can get the best from those institutions. This is not top-down, this is building from bottom up. And there's a very practical reason why we have to build from bottom up. There is different pieces of legislation, local and private acts that govern those institutions, and if there is a need for a change at the end of it, then that is the way that we will need to proceed. But we have deliberately taken the time, all the time that is required to get the sector working together to come up with as close as we can to a consensus as to how we can best move forward. And I think, Ed, you and your team have done an excellent job in this. You have held those, you've brought those groups together. I don't think that any one of those institutions think that there are hidden agendas or things that are about to be dropped on them. They see it as a way forward for working together to make the most of the financial resources they have and to have a joined-up approach. And that's what I think all of us around this table actually wanted. I think that the approach that's being taken is get the strategy right first, and then we'll consider the governance and the funding. It's got to be in that order. It doesn't make it sense to have it in any other order. I think that it's important that that mana whenua are involved, because actually, you know, this is the largest Maori city in the world. But of course, we need our cultural sector to reflect all areas of the city's population, and efforts will be made to do that. We're focused on the 5 big institutions because that's where the predominance of the resource is going, and they are the institutions that attract the greatest degree of public participation in those institutions. But we have not locked out the small institutions, and there is provision there for their input in a way that we can carry them with us as well. So I think that the progress that has been made has been timely. We will get a report back in February on the strategy, and then in July, in August I should say, we'll look at the governance and funding options. Nobody would say that this is a process that has either been hasty and rushed, or that this is a process that hasn't been collaborative with every party working together in the interests of the cultural offering that we make as a council to our city and to the world. So I commend this paper and its recommendations to councillors. I'll move the recommendations A and B together. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I declare that passed unanimously. We now come to item number 11.
I didn't vote for it, Mr Mayor, so you can't just say unanimously like that.
I heard no mentioned, but if you'd like to say that you didn't vote for it or you want to record your vote against it, Councillor, you're absolutely entitled to do that.
I abstained from voting.
Okay, that's we'll have that marked alongside your name if you wish.